thank you, everyone. My great pleasure today to have Dr. Catherine Pearce. From now on, since I'm also unfortunately got a PhD degree, we're going to address each other first name. It's a lot easier, a lot more intimate. But again, it's my great pleasure to have Catherine today with us to share with her 25 plus years of experiences, a lot of interesting highlights, and most importantly, her wisdom she wants to share with those young and hungry in the last part of our webinar. So stay tuned and do not leave. With that being said, let's start with a little introduction who we are. For many audiences, probably see us as who are you, why you are here. Let me share with you a little bit the background of who we are. This is called a BioVerse. This is a monthly webinar really co-organized by two leading ethnic Chinese focused pharmaceutical or life sciences non-profits. The first one, if you don't know it, you should know it, in my opinion, is a SAPA, Sino-America Pharmaceutical Professionals Association. So SAPA has been around almost 30 years. When I say almost, because we're going to have our 30 years anniversary celebration only, I believe, less than 2 weeks away. So stay tuned. That's one. Give a little bit idea of who we are. So this is SAPA Great Philly chapter. It's a part of the SAPA. Our mission is really, again, I'm actually speak on behalf of a SAPA as a colleague. I'm not really official kind of a member of SAPA executive team yet, so I'm speaking really on behalf of them. So their mission, I should say, our mission, to promote pharmaceutical sciences, biotechnology, number one. Number two, to contribute to public health education by raising public awareness. Number three, to facilitate scientific and business collaboration. That's pretty much why we are here today. And finally, to foster career development of pharmaceutical professionals. As you look at here, so the number for our foundation, 2002, that's a little bit undercut of the whole history of SAPA. Like I said, SAPA a little bit older than SAPA GP. We are a little bit younger than the whole history of SAPA. We are nonprofit, obviously, more than 4,000 members, have more than 140 sponsors, many followers, and WeChat group. Again, we are talking about SAPA GP. But if you talk about the whole SAPA family, it's a lot bigger than this. You can easily time this to like 5 or 6, because that's how many other chapters we still have. So that's one. And then a little bit more, as I said, this is really the core facility of SAPA GP, Great Philly. And so we have members for a lot of activities. We do a lot of sciences related stuff, and we also do a lot of business related stuff. That's exactly why we are here today. Okay, that's about SAPA GP. If you want to remember one thing, SAPA probably is the most established ethnic Chinese focused overseas, when it's overseas outside China, pharmaceutical professional organizations in the world. Now, the other part of the party is in Science We Trust community. We are on the little bit the other extreme. We're really young. We're just a few years old, officially launched more than 1 year old. Our taglines, we are the community of the aging biotech, by the aging biotech, and for the aging biotech. We mainly have 3 platforms. The first one, obviously, WeChat, that's kind of a communication tool of choice for people doing business in Asia. So we do have 4 different WeChat groups. And the proudest thing we have for our community is like most Asian biotech companies have at least one C-suite executive in our community. This we just confirmed. This is not something where we say lightly. This is number one. Number two, we do have a week newsletter. We have a little bit interesting name called Asian Biotechies Walk into a Bar. It's kind of get a parody. If Catherine probably remind you, there's a podcast from Roche and Genentech called Two Scientists Walk into the Bar. We thought like 2 were too little. Let's get a bunch of us get into the bar. So that's the second pillar. The third one is BioVerse. That's actually what we're doing today. You see the Catherine's, she looks exactly like the commercial flyer we put out there. That's our first inauguration episode of a BioVerse. Our taglines were Science Sparks Medicine. And we have a bunch more webinars already lined up. We have more than 10 speakers already signed up for next year. So stay tuned. With that being said, today, let's just focus on, Catherine, and let me start with a little introduction of her. I'll stop sharing now. So Catherine definitely is someone quite impressive. Just listen to her not short biography. So Catherine started her career in Roche in 1997. That's more than 25 years ago. And then at Merck launched therapeutics in cardiovascular space. In 2001, Catherine joined small CRO, MedPace, as a CRO manager, and then she led hundreds of global phase 1 to 4 studies in different disease areas, including nephrology, diabetes, lipid-lowering kidney disease, and obesity. Looks like she's very good in the chronic disease, which is a little bit different from what we do. I myself specialize in oncology. And then she started her first business development team, the marketing and the MedPace in 2011. 2013, she joined Teva as a VP R&D, leading a new division dedicated to evaluating generics for repurposing. And one of the most recognizable efforts she have done over there is the approval of UZEDY. I don't know whether I butchered the name or not, UZEDY. Please let me know. And she get the drug approved in 2023 for schizophrenia. UZEDY was approved in partnership with Medicell, which was a collaboration under her team, and she spearheaded it. In 2015, she decided to go back to her hometown. That's quite a big move from the epicenter of Teva, Roche, and to Cincinnati, Ohio, to found an incubator called CinRx, RX or CinRx. I don't know whether. Please correct me probably later on. The idea of launching a biotech portfolio company seemed timely because she believed that many early assets were shelved by the big pharma, biotech, or academia because it just didn't know how to do it right. So she took it, do it right, and kind of realized the full potential of those commercial capabilities. So during her time in CinRx, she developed 6 CIM portfolio companies in areas such as oncology, obesity, gastroparesis, and hypertension. When CinCor board decided to strategically exit of this company, novel aldosterone synthesis inhibitor was a public offering. So Dr. Catherine spun off with the organization, built a company's infrastructure, and helped it take it public. So after the assay demonstrates the value in phase 2, Bright HTN study published in New England Journal of Medicine, the company was eventually acquired by AstraZeneca in February 2023. But I believe the PR was actually in January 9th during JP Morgan week. I remember very clearly. It was like there was no deal, and then your deal came out. Today, Catherine just once again embarking another idea-forming company around early stage or shelved assay, with a different vehicle. This time, she's using her expert experiences to build a stronger clinical development teams, advisory board, strategic partnering, and financial backers to evaluate novel therapeutics and design the ideal trials, demonstrate the benefits and safety of a life-saving medicines for the patients that need them. So as a CEO of a newly formed company called Juca Bio, Catherine is excited about the future of drug development and possibility of bringing additional therapeutics to patients worldwide in areas of a high unmet medical needs. So that's a professional part. So this is a little bit, the last part, a little bit personal. So Catherine is also the board member of many companies. And she is also advisor to several startups and a board of a trustee member at Javier University, where she received her undergrad education and MBA. She received her doctorate in health sciences from Nova Southeastern University. She is married with 3 children. I cannot tell. And she's a very, she's a big fitness enthusiast, book lover, traveler, and avid cook. She lives by 3 creeds: say yes more often times than say no. Never ask someone to do work you are unwilling or unable to do yourself. And importantly, always look for a little fun along the way. Wow, you already share a little bit secrets for your wisdom you want to part with the young and hungry. But with that being said, welcome and thank you very much for joining us, Catherine.
Wow, thank you, Leon. That was a very kind introduction, very thoughtful introduction, and I'm really thrilled to be with SAPA and in Science We Trust community. I think what you're doing is very important. and connecting us all and in the passion of drug development, which is what we all love to do here, is really, really special and important. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, pleasure is ours. Okay, so now we have the introduction of the way. We're gonna make the best use of the coming 45 minutes with 8 questions that I share with you. So first of all, why did you choose a biotech in the very beginning, or health sciences?
I think that I didn't actually choose biotech specifically in the beginning. When I started my career, large pharma was really the place to go for drug development. And, Roche, Merck, the places that I were early in my career, they really were the powerhouses of drug development and discovery. And they still do quite a bit of work. But over the years, what has emerged is biotechs have really become the drug engine, drug discovery and development engine. And large pharma has, really shifted to become bigger commercial engines and arms, and really marketing the products that they have and carrying them on through commercial development. And so I think biotech itself is so attractive to me, over the years, because it's nimble, it's small, it's able to really address the problems of the population at the time that it's needed. So looking at unmet medical needs, when the ones that we have currently in today's market, biotechs are able to step up and meet that demand. And so I think going to a biotech really gives you that opportunity to work with great groups of scientists, very nimble teams, and bringing the expertise to really drive value towards a particular therapeutic area or an asset.
Yeah, fantastic. I think this is kind of naturally, you already partially answered my second question. Why did you choose Roche, CRO, Teva? I guess at that time they were just more established. Like you said, at that time, most of probably the majority of activities were done by them, right? So I don't know whether that was the sense you had at the time.
Yeah, at the time that I joined Roche, I mean, they were very prolific in launching products. They were launching a drug in hypertension called Posicor. They had a new drug for weight loss called Zenical. They were still doing ticlodipine in the cardiovascular market, and they were just putting out drug after drug after drug. And I was there in sort of that heyday of launching these fantastic products. And then I quickly learned, as everybody does, that there's risks in pharma, there's risk in biotech. Posicor was pulled from the market at the time, not too long after it launched, for safety concerns. And then there was some questions about pulling back the NDA for Zenical. And so things sort of took kind of a tumble. And I was lucky enough to connect with the CRO, MedPace, at the time, who was very much involved in cardiovascular drug development in the late 90s. And that is really, they're quite a powerhouse of this global CRO right now in 2023. At the time I joined, they were mainly focused in cardiovascular medicine. And so it was an opportunity really to continue what I knew about drug development from large pharma, and then getting to see from the CRO side, how different pharmaceutical companies approach this, and it's really, it's never one way. No pharma company chooses its clinical development in a cookie cutter manner. It's very nuanced to the company, to the technology that we have at the time, to the FDA guidance and regulation. And it was a fantastic opportunity to really see the variability across pharmaceutical companies and how they were developing their particularly cardiovascular diseases. So I really enjoyed that experience when, I felt like at some point I had learned all I needed to learn about the CRO world and how it functions from that end of things. It was really important to go to a place like Teva, which I always think of as a very large biotech company. Teva was incredibly innovative. What they were asking me to do and our team was really look for opportunities to repurpose drugs. So now you're looking at generic molecules that have been on the market as generics for years and years and years. And Teva had this brilliant idea that why don't we have new technology. We don't have to deliver drugs in the same way that they did when they created this original formulation, that is the generic formulation, but we have longer acting technologies. We can do things better. We can change the PK/PD profile and really make these drugs, modernize them and put them back onto the market as branded agents. And we talked about that in the intro a little bit with risperidone and what they did with the partnership with Medincell. And it's very publicly known that Medincell was instrumental in helping Teva really think about making longer acting risperidone, which is not just let's do it to do it. We did it because it's important for the patient. It's important for the physician. There was a need to make sure that we have longer acting risperidone for schizophrenic patients who are notorious for not staying on their medication, for not being compliant. And by the ability to address that, to make a better medication, then you can focus on things like behavioral therapy and changes to the patient. So, really each of those opportunities that you mentioned, Leon, Roche being at a CRO, being at large pharma, really, is a great comprehensive education to the totality of how drugs get developed, how they get, kind of considered for development, what dollars and who's willing to invest in those. And then ultimately, the patients that we're serving here, why are we doing this? We're doing this to make a better medicine for patients. And, that full kind of circle education, I was really grateful to get, and ultimately, enabled me to come back to Cincinnati and really think about, let's build an incubator company that is going to address that need in the marketplace. You're on mute, Leon.
Well, what a bad host. I'm muting myself. I was saying like you are absolutely 1 or 2 steps ahead of me. I was about to ask you, why did you move from Teva to Cincinnati? That was a quite interesting move, right? That's if you can share with us what's your thinking, what's your motivation, that would be great.
Yeah, I thought Teva, it's such an amazing company. And I saw one of the comments pop up that repurposing is still a large part of their strategy. And, I applaud that. I think that the scientists at Teva are in the best position to really think about repurposing. They are the number 1 generic manufacturers in the world, I think still. And that is, part and parcel in their wheelhouse of expertise. But I do think the idea of CinRx and coming back to Cincinnati to start an incubator was really generated by, kind of looking around the marketplace at the time and seeing that, and at Teva, we had made a large acquisition of a company called Labris for their CGRP. And, that acquisition was really great and it was necessary. And as we started talking to the founders of that company, it became very apparent to us that there's this gap in the industry between large pharma that was starting to acquire companies like Labris and early stage translational research, and that nobody was really working in the middle. There was this kind of perception idea that large pharma was willing to wait a little while and acquire drugs as they really demonstrated their value, perhaps in phase 2 or phase 3. But meanwhile, there's lots of science, there's lots of innovation that happens early stage. And oftentimes inventors, whether they be academic inventors or physician scientists that, have great ideas, don't really understand or know the path towards demonstrating value. So my expertise, my partner's expertise, they were really in clinical drug development. And, my co-founder and I at the time said, listen, we know how to do that. We know how to take early stage research and bring it forward so that someone will take notice. And oh, by the way, not being in big pharma, being in a small organization with just a few people, makes us able to do it more efficiently with less capital and kind of push it through the system. And that's really, the science of and the nuance and the art of drug development is figuring out what is the value of this compound and what is the best, fastest way to develop the drug that gets it to patients. And I think once we all became aligned around this concept, the company was born. We started building a team that were not necessarily in Cincinnati, but that were, were the best team members that we could find around the world to really support this endeavor. And I think it was the model. Obviously, we talk a little bit about CinCor and what happened with the acquisition of AstraZeneca, but that's what happened. Once a drug like CinCor, that company started, was part of that portfolio company, started to demonstrate its value, then we played out that early stage thesis of once we can show you that this drug is important, someone will come along and be interested because it's valuable, because it deserves to be in the hands of patients.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure I didn't mute myself. I absolutely agree. So right now, actually, based on what you said, I feel like today, the value of death, that's how people call it like a phase 1 clinical trial, phase 1, phase 2 clinical trial. sounds like now it's deeper and wider than before. Because you said, right now the big pharma just don't want to get too early into clinical trial. They want to wait. They're waiting to pay top dollars. They just don't want to take the risk. On the other hand, academia, biotechs, especially a lot of scientific founders who do not have a, clinical trial, even like, medical background, they really struggled with the clinical development, especially the first in human, right? Phase 1. Do you agree that's the observation, I have, or do you think there's actually more nuances in it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to generalize and say that every academic doesn't know how to do that. I think that there are highways that you can go through. Sometimes the struggle is, or at least as I see it, as people generate data on their compound or their molecule that doesn't really move the needle, that the results that they generate from that data are ambiguous, and or they are trying to see anything. So they design lots of experiments hoping to hit a target or to hit an endpoint that will resonate with someone, rather than spending the time to say, this is how my drug works, this is the thesis, and I'm going to design a program that is narrower than maybe they would think about, and drive towards a specific outcome. But I would say that, yeah, I think sometimes it's a struggle to understand what that initial study is going to be. And that's why, I'm such a big proponent of finding the right partners and the people that can help you. Within academic institutions, at least in the United States, there's lots of support networks that, that they want to push the research out of the university. So sometimes they can be more helpful than not than helping you find those partners. And then there are people like us that are, kind of looking around, trying to get connected to early phase research because we want that opportunity to help bring that drug forward.
Yeah, again, that's a little bit off topic, but a little bit off track, but it looks like you are such an expert of clinical development, especially you develop drug for approval. So I have a sense. I used to work with academic investigator for IIT investigator initiate study. One thing I've sensed exactly like you said, sometimes they treat the clinical trial as their experiments. They just have too many things they want to look at. So when they do that, the results unclear. So probably you can educate us or kind of give us a little bit high level thinking. What's the difference between academic clinical research and I would say regulatory path focused clinical research, which you are very good at the later one?
Yeah, I mean, it's really when I think about academic research, I think you're really trying to be exploratory. You're trying to discover things maybe that are just simply unknown. That's what you patent on. That's what ultimately, you kind of are investigating. That's the whole point, is to say, I have something, I've made it druggable. I had a target, I made it druggable. What happened here? And then more importantly, maybe some of the things that you didn't expect when you started your experiments. You're looking at animal models, you're trying to ascertain the safety of this drug, perhaps the efficacy, and that's very important. We need that information. When I think about designing a clinical program, it's towards a TPP, a product profile and a label. Whenever you think about drug development, I always think about that we're driving towards a label eventually, and then working backwards to the studies that will support that label. So if you know that the regulatory endpoint is, and I'll just use blood pressure, you have to show a lowering of blood pressure here, not necessarily morbidity and mortality, which is, the guideline for the FDA. Then we work back, well, how much blood pressure lowering do we need to see? What kind of studies can we design to show that we're beneficial as a third, fourth, fifth line hypertensive agent on top of standard of care? That's what our label is going to say. So let's work backwards. That's a regulatory endpoint versus putting, a drug into someone and saying, well, let's see what happens here. And I think all of that's important research to put it into the context of driving towards getting a drug to a patient. But it is a little bit different lens that you look at it when you're developing drugs for regulatory authorization.
Fantastic. Oh, by the way, just a quick housekeeping. I should have said this in the very beginning. For people who dial in the webinar directly, please only put your question in the Q&A. Otherwise, we would not have time to address it because we do have a volunteer address a question if they can be addressed offline. Q&A, please. If you are watching this from other platform, please just drop your question in whatever format over there, and our volunteer gonna relay those questions from different platform and concentrate into our central back channel. So I will say it. but make sure your questions are very relevant. Do not ask a specific your, let's say your company, because that would be not a very good use of our audience time. Going back, so Catherine, there's quite a few questions already related to CinCor. So it looks like people really cannot wait to listen to your story about CinCor. So if you can give us a little bit of a, kind of a overarching kind of 2 minutes description of a CinCor story, or 5 minutes, and then later I'm pretty sure people have a lot of questions follow up. Please go ahead.
Sure. So we talked about the incubator, CinRx, and the thesis there was to go and find early stage assets or shelved assets. And so CinCor was created around a drug called Baxdrostat, and I don't remember what the name was. It was RO something, a drug that Roche had decided to put on the shelf. And this happens often to pharmaceutical companies. They decide they're strategically getting out of a therapeutic area, and just a small sidebar here, that's part of what's going on right now. You see a lot of changes sometimes in large pharma in their R&D and their kind of relook at their portfolios, and are we going to do this? Are we going to refocus or on this area? And in the case of Roche, they had done this several years before and became knowledgeable about this portfolio. And, we talked about my background in cardiovascular medicine and had a lot of insight into what Roche's portfolio at that time. And, this drug was particularly interesting to us because it is an aldosterone synthase inhibitor. There wasn't another ASI on the market, and blood pressure is still a major issue in the United States and around the world. We have a really hard time getting blood pressure under control. So it took a long time to do a deal with Roche. And I would say that before the company CinCor was even established, it was a lot of back and forth for probably almost 2 years before we were able to really secure a license, and then began, the arduous road of fundraising. And at the time, we had gone to several venture capitalists and attempted to fundraise around this idea, and were met with a lot of resistance. Hypertension is not a sexy indication. It's not the microbiome. It's not NASH. It's not, checkpoint inhibitors. So I think that the time period that it took to actually get a team around the table, was significant. And I think that's important for people to know, because it's not as though you have a great idea, which we thought we had a great idea, and then everybody flocks to you and opens up a checkbook. It took a lot of conversations, a lot of positioning of the drug to say, this is still really important. And when you go out to venture capitalists or when you go out to raise money, it's imperative that you really discuss the differentiation there, and how is this going to eventually end up in the hands of patients? What is it going to take to get it there? And, I'm really grateful for our Series A, investors. We had a fantastic investor in Sophie Nova and Jim Healy, who really understood the value proposition. He was at Amarin. He believed in treating cardiovascular medicine, these chronic diseases, and helped get us off the ground. And then from there, it was really a series of, I think, excellent mistakes and infrastructure building and company building to demonstrate the value of Baxdrostat. And I think putting it, the first studies that were designed, the Brighton trial that you referenced, that was ultimately published in the New England Journal of Medicine, it was a smart design in the sense that it really looked at what we knew were the problems. It wasn't. It was a drug that was on top of other agents where patients still were not in control of their hypertension. And ultimately, I think that's what eventually ended up demonstrating the value of the drug. And the rest of the story. We had, spoken to AstraZeneca before, and I think they were very smart and thoughtful in their deliberations and their diligence of us, and ultimately came to us, and the company was never for sale, but the company was bought. And I think that's important too, when you look at how M&A comes about. And if there's an interest, we can talk a little bit more about that. But companies that are, we did a crossover round and we did an IPO, and we had plenty of cash to take that drug forward. We could have done the phase 3 ourselves. But again, we had a great board. The timing was right. AstraZeneca is a fantastic partner. And we really felt that the larger opportunity to get the drug out commercially would be better in AstraZeneca's hands than in ours.
Absolutely great. So actually, when I look at the CinCor's history, there was not a kind of a straightforward, right? There's like up and downs. So I remember like right before, probably a couple months before AstraZeneca announced the M&A with your company, there was a little bit deep. And Wall Street, I used to be one of them. Very, very kind of have very short attention. Could you elaborate that story? How that done actually whether really well, and you end up with a super good ending.
Yeah, I think that's also very important to discuss. There is no straight line in pharma, and it's amazing how we had this fantastic result in the Brighton study, and then the follow-up study didn't meet its primary endpoint, and we had a significant placebo response, and the market responded to that. And I don't think it wasn't because the drug itself didn't work. We knew the drug worked, and I think my speculation is I think AstraZeneca knew the drug worked too. But a failed study is never a welcome result. And when I look back at how that study, failed, it is a consequence of doing these types of studies, and not just in hypertension. There are certain therapeutic areas where placebo is really powerful. And, looking back at that trial design and how could we have better accounted for placebo effect, there is probably some of that learning that had we gone on to the phase 3, and internally we had interrogated extensively, how to mitigate that in a subsequent study. And I think had we done the phase 3, we would have been able to do that. But we were very surprised that we had such a high placebo effect. And then, of course, we had a very high treatment effect. But, it doesn't work in a placebo-controlled study to have both. So that was a challenge. It was tremendously difficult to talk to analysts, many of them who, were very disappointed in the result and not pleased with that. And then some of them, I think, that understood, but were hoping that we had learned something to mitigate in the phase 3. And quite honestly, it was good to see it in phase 2 and not phase 3. Because we had the opportunity to learn from that study. So, and of course, we saw a placebo effect in Brighton as well. It just wasn't as pronounced as it was in the Halo study. So those up and downs are that's it's part of biotech and things that we live with in this environment.
Absolutely. And also I believe at that time, biotech get punished by any, mistake. Sometimes just like a misfortune, right? Even absolutely not your fault, you get punished. That was just probably one of the worst time, right? Because investors are very, very sensitive, and people need to put this into the background, right? And that time, people don't know what the Federal Reserve is gonna do. Everyone's like, don't touch biotech. Anything no revenue in 5 years, I don't want to touch it. It's pretty much people's sentiment, right? That's definite. So I see quite a few questions from the Q&A. I'll ask you. There's one from Vikash. He said, these days, drug repurposing is a big company's game, and most angel VCs stay away from drug repurposing unless you have a novel reformulation. What if the therapeutic index is impressive enough without reformulation? Well, how would you get a funding with that? Is that possible?
So if I understand, I can't see the question, but you're asking about reformulation and when you can demonstrate value in terms of, what you need to see. I mean, I would say, yes, whoever is asking that question is absolutely correct. It's a big company's game, because I used to think, and I have a public patent out there for deuterated domperidone. So one of the first things we did was to look at deuterating domperidone, a drug that wasn't able to be brought to the US market because of QTC liability potentially. And by deuterating it, the thesis was you could slow down the PK and potentially make a safer domperidone. However, that idea was not terribly attractive to investors, because and I would have thought the opposite. We know a lot about domperidone's safety profile, how it behaves. And if we could just tweak this one little aspect of it, we already know the drug works around the world. It's just not utilized in the United States. So I was very surprised that people didn't latch on to repurposing. And I think the only issue there is you really have to go so much further in development. You really have to have human data, maybe significant amounts of human data, in order to demonstrate value to pharma if you're going to go the repurposing route. It's almost counterintuitive, because a lot of times I find that it's easier to invest in a moonshot, if that translates, something that where we know nothing about the outcome of this, but the preclinical is so compelling. It has such novelty that we're going to invest a lot of money into this novel agent, and repurposing is kind of ho-hum boring and not as interesting to us. And oh, by the way, it may not make as much money as something that's really novel and creative. So, I think you have to go a lot further in order to demonstrate the value of a repurposed asset. And it has to be so that when you do demonstrate that value, that the original drug isn't going to be used off label. So if you demonstrate something where the dose is the same as the original molecule, the formulation is not that distinct, or you can't get some sort of proprietary intellectual property composition of matter, it's going to be very hard to say, oh, well, you showed that you can use this, thalidomide in a different indication. That's great, but I could use the old. You just proved that you could use the old drug in that indication too.
Absolutely. So you are talking about the shiny, innovative drugs. Probably is an easier story to tell. And there's just a question for you. So Stephen Yan asked you, how do you compare baxdrostat with AGT siRNA? Roche did a deal with Alnylam, right? They have siRNA based. I guess that's what he referred to. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's great that, it's kind of come full circle that Roche has gotten back into hypertension. So, because that's where the baxdrostat came from. But, there's obvious differences between the two assets. It's longer acting agent. It potentially could be very beneficial. I think, I haven't looked in the past couple months, but the story really is, around compliance and getting patients to maybe be more compliant and take, which in their chronic illness is really important. So, I think it's a different mechanism. Certainly it provides optionality to patients, I think, but I'm pleased to see it, going forward. I don't think will displace baxdrostat or any kind of aldosterone synthase inhibitor, but I do think it has a role, and it's an important drug in the armamentarium of treating hypertension.
All right, there's another question. Actually, this question I wanted to ask you as well. How the placebo effect handled must be a very interesting story. Could you elaborate a little bit more? How could you kind of, mitigate the placebo effects, especially for chronic disease, not only for cardiovascular disease, right? And also like your schizophrenia, NASH, even sometimes a lot of neurological diseases, right? There's tons of placebo effects. How would you handle that typically?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had talked about various options of how to handle that, but I think, there are objective ways to do it. You can test in the urine. It's not ideal because, by the time they're going, they're further along in the program by the time you get the results back. There are ways to, have longer extended run-ins, and the patient doesn't know that they're not taking the drug in the run-in. So to kind of test their compliance early on, we talked about witnessing, taking the drug. And then, that's a possibility to do either via video or having the patient come and take the drug in the office. I mean, we really got pretty deep into ways to mitigate the placebo because patients, and this seems overly simplistic, but to really pick the right patient in the beginning. I mean, some patients are motivated to come into clinical programs, maybe not for all the right reasons. And I think that when you get certain investigators and certain sites that are maybe, these aren't their patients, they're referrals that come from the community or from advertising, and they don't have a good sense of who this patient is. They just know that they qualify for that clinical trial. That might not be the best way to get a patient into the study. Physicians who are treating patients who they know are having a difficulty in managing their hypertension or schizophrenia or any other disease where the placebo rate is so high, we really need to think about that. And, we're talking now at Juca Bio about pain studies. And, there's such a need to do these chronic pain studies. But again, once bitten, twice shy. We're a little bit unsure if we want to do a pain study, given the high rates of placebo that we often see. And so we're having this conversation over again. And how do you mitigate that in a study? And maybe it's really looking at patients at two separate time points, rating their pain, for example. And if they're, so divergent, maybe that's not the right patient for you in a study. So, picking the right patient, really having close observation and monitoring during the study. And then there are some measures in collecting data. When you're collecting data and you're partnering with your CRO or your internal data review to make sure that the results themselves coming in, blinded results, that they are not too cute or clean. Sites who don't report adverse events or sites that report numbers that look very similar, you need to investigate that. So there's a multitude of ways that I think it needs to be addressed on all fronts, and it's never one solution. It's usually, a lot of very detailed solutions that need to be considered.
Yeah, Catherine, that's a fantastic point. I personally always believe one of the most challenging part for drug development actually is phase 1, phase 2 clinical development, especially for chronic disease. Actually this idea came not just kind of believed by me, many others, including some top analysts said, when they look back in hundreds of companies which are kind of come and go, right? Very few still there, most of them already gone. This is like a fail, not because their science failed them, because their clinical program failed them.
Right.
Especially when they work on some indication which are a little bit challenging. So, I have this really kind of a discussion point. From your point of view, since you have run so many clinical trials, from the difficulty point of view, for different indication, you just named, let's say, 3 or 5, you are familiar with. But the most difficult to the least difficult, in your opinion, what that would be? I know this is pretty random.
Well, I mean, first of all, Lee and I agree with you. I've had a lot of venture tell me very recently that they would take an A team and a B science over A science with a B team. And for the exact reason that you're saying, that they see a lot of clinical development programs that could have been fantastic tanked by bad development, bad execution. And that is a real worry and fear by investors that, they look first at the drug and second, very close second at the team who's going to be involved. So I think it's important. In terms of challenging, I think the ones that, are kind of, I'll call them more heartbreaking than others, are the ones that take such a long time to figure out whether you have a drug. So you're working on an Alzheimer's program for years and years and years and years. It's such a subjective, finding, and patients are in those studies for such a long time that, you're really hoping that the outcome is something that you can achieve for them. And it's a difficult endpoint. It's hard to assess. And I think those are the same with any type of neuropsych disorder, diseases that in pain, like fibromyalgia, visceral pain, anytime the endpoint is a little more subjective, and it's hard. I just was talking to somebody recently that said that their diabetic peripheral neuropathy study failed, but it wasn't because of the patient reporting outcome. The patients didn't understand what it meant to average a score. So, and they never thought to explain to them what average means. So, we need to investigate those things. And we all assume, we know what an average is, but patients don't. And as a consequence, they reported numbers that were not averages. And it's simply because they didn't know what that meant. But when you're relying on a patient to report data and then you don't explain to them how you're collecting it, there's a disconnect between what we're studying and what they're telling you, they're observing or feeling on the drug. So I think those are challenging and things that, we really need to get smarter on and take the patient's perspective when you're going to do that type of study. The ones that I find the easiest, kind of obvious, doing a diabetes study, we kind of know, your blood work doesn't lie. We lowered your hemoglobin A1C or we didn't. And that's, a little bit more straightforward, and it's hard to sort of, or anything where there's a hemodynamic endpoint. And, without revealing too much, some of the next programs and the companies that I'm starting now, have hard endpoints. They have hemodynamic endpoints that are difficult to, you can't really fake those. You get a right heart cath, and that's part of the endpoint that we'll be looking at. So I think it's necessary to do all of those studies, but we need to be honest with, how we can improve the collection of data and the reporting of those outcomes.
Feels like, the longer the trial you need to run, the more difficult they would be. And also the more subjective your endpoints are, the more difficult that would be.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's kind of a...
Absolutely. And I think that's completely correct. And kind of a generalization, but true. And, think about what happens over the course of time. You're asking patients to dedicate potentially years of their life in treatment and frequent visits and follow-up. And, the type of patients that are able to do that maybe aren't, the ones that you absolutely need to study. You need younger patients, you need older patients, and not everybody has that time commitment. And then as life comes up, patients drop out. And we all lived through the COVID experience and ongoing clinical trials at that time. Patients were very hesitant to come to a hospital. And if you were running a hospital-based clinical program, you saw a huge dropout and patients who said, I just can't do this right now. And that's a real, kind of headache for the industry.
Yeah. So I wonder how people are going to run the longevity clinical trial. Right now it's pretty trendy.
I think I'd be pretty motivated if you could make, you could show years to my life. I think I'd stay in that program, but
yes.
Of course.
So now let's talk about the new venture, right? CinCor was great, but that's a past. I think the best one is the next one, right? And the better one, at least the better one is the next one. So what's about Juca Bio? What's the difference? What's your focus? What's the kind of principle of your story over there?
Yeah, so we're really excited to start Juca Bio, and I think it's really exciting to sort of build upon the lessons that we learned. And so Juca Bio is really a return to the incubator model. And CinCor was a one asset company eventually when it spun out of the original incubator. But the idea of an incubator is really to have multiple assets, each in their own portfolio company, to do something very similar. And I think, I am a very risk adverse person, and biotech is high risk. So having multiple drugs that you can develop, allows you to sort of have that risk be diluted across multiple companies. And I'm really excited about some of the partnerships that are going to arise from these. And it really has become a partnership rather than just the model of in-licensing a drug from pharma, which we are in the process of doing. We also have the opportunity to partner with some fantastic scientists. And, I'm going to be announcing those deals in hopefully before the end of the year. But it's really fantastic to see, the opportunity to work with people who are known scientists who have done great innovative work. And really, we are going to be supporting the execution of these programs. And I think we'll get a lot of attention in the future. So we're returning to the model of looking at chronic markets and being very disciplined about that. I think, it's difficult for me to do drugs that are maybe just short treatments. Things like infectious disease are difficult, or hospital products. Acute kidney injury is difficult for me to do. But we've looked at a number of assets in chronic disease. And again, it's a great time because pharma continues to reshuffle their portfolios. And a lot of things either kind of get put on the shelf or, they're not interested anymore. So those are the type of conversations that we're having now. Building infrastructure, looking for good people to come on board. And I'm still, looking for opportunities. So, lots of the folks that maybe are on this discussion this morning or this evening, may have assets that they're looking to partner or engage with a group like ours who are developers and would be interested in speaking to them.
Fantastic. I think, anyone with a good asset should reach out to you, and I'm more than happy to make the connection. That's one of the reasons we always invite people here, because, not only we are educating each other, hopefully there are going to be some partnership come out of those webinars. That'll be great, right?
Absolutely.
So another question about, obviously, sorry, there's a car outside, have a little bit problem. Apologize for that. So another question is, a little bit about the China biotech or China life science industry as a whole. So that's where I'm sitting. Like I said, I'm sitting in Chongqing, which is second tier city in terms of life sciences in China, absolutely. But they are upcoming. And as you know, you probably don't know right now, China biotech under tremendous headwinds, multiple, really, really historic bannings, put this way. But I think on the other hand, the China biotech is our licensing activities exploding. I can only use that word, exploding. Is really, really impressive. And I guess probably some of them came across your desk as well. My question to you is, what do you view, generally speaking, not specific asset, China biotech's impact on the US and global biotech market?
I mean, I think just the innovation in China over the past several years has been tremendous. And, what our perception is, what my perception is just the speed and the scientific innovation that's going on is really tremendous. And, I don't know if you saw, Leon, but, the Exelixis deal within Silico, just, amazing, that deal. And, that platform of artificial intelligence, kind of creeping into the landscape here of drug development, and Silico's ability to capitalize on that, and really put out, I saw their suite of assets that they've developed there is really quite compelling. And I think that sort of, and also the manufacturing, the ability to generate synthetic compounds, I think is really stepped up in China. And so the manufacturing capabilities, the innovation, the science, and some of the deals that are coming out of China right now really are going to put more drugs on the global stage. And companies like Beijing, who have been really smart, and they have come out and said, I want to be the next Genentech in China. Their CEO has been quoted, and he's built this global cadre of scientists and partnerships, and really reaching out. And you and I have spoken in the past. We develop drugs for the world, not for any one geography. And so we're really looking forward to seeing all the innovation that's coming out of China, and giving opportunities to partner those innovations worldwide, to ultimately get to patients, which is all what we do in this industry. So I'm excited about it. And I think despite the fact that there are headwinds, there will always be challenges and headwinds, I think we go through cycles. And I think as some of those things start to kind of come back around, there will be a stage and an opportunity for China to really shine.
Absolutely agree with you. So I've been traveling in China in the past 2 or 3 weeks. Have talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, investors, and physicians, and also key opinion leaders. The consensus is really the same as you just described. Even you are from outside, from the internally, from in China, they also feel like in the current pain rate, it's really pretty dramatic. Sometimes I feel like intolerable, but they think that the pain gonna be going away. In the midterm, long term, the China biotech gonna come up as a stronger and better industry, and make a bigger contribution to the global market, helping more patients. With that being said, on a given moment, based on your experiences, what's already mentioned quite a few upsides of China biotech: the speed, the innovation, people's enthusiastic attitude about this industry. So what obvious gaps you have seen when you deal with them, when you interact with the China biotech, or when you look at their assets?
Yeah, maybe not so much assets. We could talk about those. Some of the assets that I've seen recently that were available for out licensing, for better or for worse, they're often Me Too projects. I mean, they're slight, tiny improvements on drugs that are available elsewhere, or that are up and coming in development. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but those are probably less attractive to acquirers and venture than something novel. So if you're developing another drug for throw out an example, a PHD1 inhibitor, that is probably less attractive than if you really came up with a novel drug for autoimmune disorder, and really chasing those novel pathways versus an improvement on an existing pathway. That's my personal bias, and I see some of that coming out of China. I would say from, it's not necessarily a gap, it's just something that's going to be less attractive on the global market stage. I would say that, one of the kind of question marks I always have in China is, kind of tightening up the regulatory pathway there. A lot of the programs, at least that we try to get China involved in, we want them to come early into the program, into the global program. And so making sure that companies like ours really do plan for that bridging study, whether it be done in China, or maybe the acceptability of using Chinese subjects outside of China to file that, bridging study. Those kind of conversations, I still think, we can do a better job as global drug developers, but also sort of looking for that partnership with Chinese regulators as to how can we do this most effectively, so that China is always part of the global program, and that the medicines get to China as quickly from a regulatory standpoint as they do the US or Europe. So I think there's lots and lots we can all do better globally to improve, but drug development is absolutely global development. And we need to make sure that every lens in development is approached with that thinking.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. That definitely is a global business. It's like team sports involve every major countries. Not all of them yet, but I think actually all of them going to be involved because they either involve in the drug development or going to be the market, part of the market, right? Especially you are developing some like life-saving drugs. So I guess right now let's move to Q&A. There do have a few questions lined up. The first one is a little bit kind of a 10,000 view question. How would you choose a valuable but uncrowded pipeline asset to work on?
Repeat the question, a valuable but uncrowded pipeline.
Yeah, how can you pick the valuable but uncrowded pipeline asset to work on? I mean, capital is limited. What's your decision process? This is kind of a valuable but not a crowded. I think it's almost impossible, but I'll give it to you.
No, I mean, I think, valuable but uncrowded market, that actually sounds kind of, opportunistic. If it's valuable and there's nobody else developing it, wouldn't you take a chance on that drug? I think, that almost sounds ideal. I think, when I look at drugs for development, there's very disciplined and in the things that we'll take on. It has to address an unmet medical need. That's first and foremost. There's got to be a rationale for why we're developing this drug. There is a disease out there. And even though, we have lots of, kind of therapies potentially around it, or we don't, this drug that you're talking about has to address something that we're not currently seeing with what we have available. That's number one. There has to be a defined regulatory pathway, something, that's unambiguous in clinical development. So some things I struggle with, for example, are developing drugs for jet lag. Somebody came to me with a drug for jet lag. And I'm a little unclear how we develop, how we ensure that drug gets to the market of jet lag. What does that mean? Is that really circadian rhythm disorder, or weight disorder? What are we talking about here? So some things where, it's a little less straightforward is sometimes tough to get around. And then I think there has to be composition of matter. There has to be IP that has enough tread on it that if the IP is expiring next year, we're not going to convince people that they're going to get the value of marketing this drug for a period of time that pays them back for the clinical development investment. So we need to be, kind of thinking about those things when we decide what drugs are we taking on. And, being very disciplined in those approaches means that you say no to some things that maybe look kind of potentially interesting, but just not, doesn't fit that criteria.
Fantastic. So next question, a little bit specific. I think it's a little bit probably can be applied to many people. So the question, hi, Catherine, does compassion still matter in our field? That's a big ask. He developed a cheap product and approached two big pharma companies. It only caused the big pharma to terminate their in-house Alzheimer programs. The product works very effectively to stop mid-stage AD. Where can I get help?
Yeah, number one, I think, honestly, sometimes our industry gets a bad rap for all sorts of reasons, but I think that the majority of people that go into this industry do it because they are compassionate and they do want to make a difference. And otherwise, it would be really easy to get so discouraged every day, given all the setbacks that typically happen to all of us in drug development. And you think, I really would just like to hang it up today. So absolutely, there's compassion. And I would just say, don't give up. Besides the fact there are traditional sources of funding, there are all sorts of other non-traditional modalities of getting money and getting support to take a drug out. So, I don't know the particular circumstances here, but if you really think you have something that could be valuable, there are high net worth individuals, there's family offices that can be approached, there's foundations that look to support drugs like this. There are other methods. It just doesn't mean that you get a straightforward answer, perhaps from and I don't know, maybe you would get a straightforward response from a VC about taking a drug out of pharma, setting it up yourself and investing in it. That's a possibility. But there are other ways that people who have a personal interest and want to put their own money behind seeing drugs being developed that will support something like this. And we all know how devastating Alzheimer's is. And I think you could, don't give up hope and don't think of it sometimes in just a linear fashion, but more creatively of how to get things financed.
All right, this is going to be our last question. And what is the appetite for novel payloads for ADC, antibody drug conjugates?
What's coming up?
So what is the appetite of the industry for novel payloads for ADCs?
Yeah, I think there's lots of appetite for that. I mean, it waxes and wanes, and there's been quite a few that are kind of in the pipeline. But yes, absolutely. I've seen a lot of companies, and I'm blanking on the one in San Diego that's doing this quite well. But yeah, I hope that there is a group working out there on better conjugates. I think that this is an interesting area.
All right, so I guess that's all the questions for today. So, the last part, like we promised in the very beginning, if Catherine can share with us your 3 top advices to the young and hungry. I hope I can put myself into the category as well. I'm probably gonna be the oldest of the young and hungry, kind of a category.
Let's always stay young and hungry, Leon. Let's always stay young and hungry. I would say, constantly be, building your network, talking to groups like this, getting involved, staying interested and curious about what's going on around you, staying up on the regulations and the science. The people that I know that do this the best are well-read people. They have lots of connections. And, this may not seem obvious, but go outside of your industry too. We are sometimes so focused on our own industry-specific networks, but when you go out to other areas, health tech maybe, or, just other networks, retail, people that are doing other things and other entrepreneurs, you get really good ideas as to how to fundraise, how to approach problem solving, things like that. So stay curious, build your networks, explore outside your network, stay an interested person, a learned person. And I think you will always, find success that way. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you. And certainly, Leon, folks that want to join my network, I'm pleased to be part of your network. Let's continue to build this global community.
Absolutely. I think that's the best way to say it. And I think all the advice is very good to me already. And I'm pretty sure a lot of audience going to enjoy it. But thank you so much, Catherine. And we are looking forward to more collaboration opportunities with you, not just only webinar. Hopefully some of the audience, if you have an interest in asset, please reach out to us. So we are very happy to connect you with Catherine. With that being said, that's the end of today's webinar, but this is just a very beginning of our series of webinar BioVerse. So I want to take this opportunity to do a quick shout out for incoming webinar. Catherine, you're probably going to be interested as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So next webinar going to be Chris Sheldon. He's SVP of BD of GSK. And my pitch to him is like, GSK, you were hired because they want you to beef up the pipeline. You don't want to miss out the 25% of pipeline assets in the world which belong to China BioTech. I said, yeah, that's interesting. That's why he's here. So I guess next one, wish everyone book your calendar. If you want to find the time, please contact us either in Science We Trust community or SAPA GB. And with that being said, thank you so much again, Catherine. I wish you have a lovely night. And thank you for sharing your fantastic stories and your wisdom with the young and hungry.
Thanks so much. And have a great day and good morning. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Good night and good day, everyone around the world. Take care. Bye-bye.